Awesome. So I would like to welcome everyone to MTRI's 2022 seminar series. Each week in July and August, we'll be hosting a talk on the biodiversity and conservation of Guestbowick, Southwest Nova Scotia. My name is Morgan Snare. I am a summer research assistant here at the Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that MTRI is in and we are meeting from Guestbowick, one of the 7 districts of Mi'kma'ki, homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. We acknowledge the treaties of peace and friendship, and we thank the Mi'kmaq people for their generosity in sharing their homeland with us. MTRI is a research-based nonprofit nestled in Southwest NS near Keji National Park and Historic Site, and within the Southwest Nova Scotia Biosphere Reserve. Our mission is to promote, conserve, and sustain biodiversity in Guestbowick and beyond. Tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce Charles Bourne. Charles just recently earned his Master of Architecture from Dalhousie University. And next, I will hand the seminar over to Charles, but I would like to remind everyone to please keep your mics muted. And if you have any questions during the talk, please type them in the chat window. Charles, with that, you can take it away.
Thanks, Morgan.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Yeah, I just want to start with a couple of contextual or introductory things to say, just to give a little bit of background before showing off this imaginary world that I was able to create just during the last year of the Dalhousie architecture program, as Morgan mentioned. So this is very much an imaginary world. Yeah, let's start with where I am right now. So right now I'm an intern architect. That means basically that I recently graduated and that I'm on the road to becoming a licensed architect. Now I'm learning the practical and real world business of it all. But in order to get here, I had to do this thesis project. So what is an architectural thesis? I'll do my best to introduce this. It's basically an imaginary design project that tries to use buildings in a new or innovative approach in order to solve one or many problems. So in order to start with the whole project, you have to identify a problem or a topic to begin with. The topic I chose to follow was forestry in Nova Scotia, something that I imagine has something to do with connecting me with the MTRI folks. So I did some pre-research travels around the province, not being able to travel outside the province because of COVID, and I was really lucky to be able to do that. I sought out clear cuts, something that I saw as this huge, relatively hidden activity all over the province that can be somewhat hard to find. And I asked what it means, who it affects, and how buildings might both help people understand the scale in space and time of these activities, and how they might also how buildings might also actively help in making forestry a healthy and positive industry for people and the planet here. So just as a preface, I know there might be some experts in the audience or people watching this recording later on. This presentation contains a lot of simplifications. I am by no means an expert in forestry, in ecology, and biology, like a lot of the folks who have to do with the MTRI. So I'm sorry for these simplifications, but I welcome your feedback after the presentation. So with all that, here is my thesis. It's about 15 minutes long, and it looks to tell this whole story from a few characters' points of view, as you'll see. I'm going to share my screen. So the title of my thesis is Framing the Forest: Restoring Nova Scotia's Hidden Landscapes of Extraction. I'm going to bring you through this landscape and its proposed future across a series of scales and points of view, starting here in a clear cut in Southwest Nova Scotia. Driving down the gravel road, a logger thinks to himself, here he is again in the woods, like his grandfather, to cut trees. His grandfather's woodlot was tall and beautiful, like the trees around him here. But he hesitates when he arrives at the open cut, thinking of the many scars that he's left in the forest just like this. But this is just how he makes a living. He doesn't see another way with his skills and his knowledge. At the tree line, an endangered mainland moose cow and calf hesitate to venture into the vast field of bare earth, littered with stumps, sticks, and young shrubs. It's tempting to browse for leaves in the open here, but to reach their usual shelter on the other side of the cut, they can either take the long way and follow the canopy, or they can risk the unsheltered sun. If they overheat, they will die. Meanwhile, the wildflowers and rotting wood have brought new insects. The olive-sided flycatchers have arrived here from the tropics. They're tired, hungry, and looking for a place to nest. And they prefer open areas like the clear cut for the abundant bugs. But this doesn't look like the natural clearings that they favor. Where's the dense cover at the edge where they can hide? And where are the tall dead trees they use as lookouts? This edge comes all at once, and then it disappears. Up high on the mature trees left over in the clear-cut center, it's just bright enough and just humid enough for a rare symbiosis of algae and fungi to cling to life. The black foam lichen lingers here, eliminated from the rest of Canada because of forestry. But this is no oasis. Now that it's surrounded by open air, it's too windy, too sunny, and too dry. Soon the lichen will dry up, or its host tree will fall in the wind. These are just a few of many species that live in Nova Scotia's forests. They're at risk of extinction in part because of problematic forestry practice. It's no surprise that clear-cutting changes habitat, but just how much of these forests have been altered may be surprising. Nova Scotia is home to vast areas of a unique landscape called Acadian forest. This is a diverse mixed ecology, bridging the southern hardwood forest and northern boreal forest in a fragile balance. This landscape is everywhere. It covers 3/4 of the province, and 1/3 of that is public land. It's a familiar and common place of leisure, rural living, and retreat, and is an important source of economic and cultural value. A scientist wakes to the sound of birds. She's been coming here 2 weeks at a time for 5 years, trying to learn how the forest recovers from cutting. Every year she notices change. Will the moose survive the winter? Will the flycatchers disappear? The old clear cut nearby looks recovered, but the regrowth of the canopy hides deeper troubles. Shallow soil slowly runs away. Networks of old roots are rotten. The trees that return will not be the same. She remembers a poem by Louise Gluck. We have deprived them of their origins. They've come to need us now, she writes. What we see in Nova Scotia's forest is not like some primeval wilderness, but something more like a vast, slow-moving farm. Almost 99% of it has been altered by a cycle of cutting, regrowth, and cutting that upsets its delicate diversity. So how well do we really know this familiar, ubiquitous landscape? In a sense, it is a wasteland. It's both a human ruin and a wild, untouched place, neither natural nor built. But if this forest is a wasteland, this is not easy to see. When it regrows, it looks like forest, and cut blocks are often hidden, difficult to access, and slowly ever-changing. The moose, however, is familiar with these strange fields. This morning, she walked downhill through trees to the cool water of a swamp. When she returned, the trees were gone in a hot, open scar. The machines are fast, but the forest is slow. 2 hikers have come here to see for themselves. Their footsteps are muffled by soft moss as vertical trees embrace them in parallel lines. Huge old stumps punctuate the path, but the verticals around them are thin. What happened here and how long ago? They're curious and filled with questions. Finally, they reach the forest edge and the open vista of the cut block. This is not a postcard landscape, but a place to daydream and consider their place. So what exactly is a clear cut? In clear-cut forestry, all the trees are removed at once and regrown as plantations. This reduces biodiversity, erodes soils, and regrows as evenly aged forests with fewer species, making them susceptible to fire and disease. Remember that the Acadian forest is diverse by definition. Paradoxically, harvesting this way reduces the land's capacity to grow trees of significant market value in the future. Alternatives do exist. Scientists, activists, scholars, and Indigenous peoples are calling for these alternatives to be implemented right away in a kind of critical care for an ecosystem in crisis. This means halting most clear cutting in favor of a new forestry paradigm that takes a long view of forest resources. This project then exists in the near future. When Nova Scotia's forests are restored through this new forestry paradigm. This new paradigm will mean constant monitoring by experts, as well as selective harvest and planting operations over the course of at least 100 years. This is the Center for Forest Stewardship, a home base for this activity. In intact stands of trees, trees are selectively harvested to favor native species, subtracting from the forest that was cut and transformed long ago. The resulting lumber is sold to fund the project or used on site to build. But in these areas, built infrastructure is avoided. Clear cuts, on the other hand, ask for addition. Saplings are planted or regrow naturally, again favoring native species. Built infrastructure is introduced here to support the recovery program and to provide access to this transforming landscape. So with this built infrastructure, this thesis asks, how can architecture contribute to our understanding of forest landscapes that have been altered by extraction while also acting on their recovery? I'll try to answer this by providing meaningful encounters with this altered landscape through framing its past, present, and future from many perspectives, and by enabling active participation in this scheme of care and recovery. To meet these parameters, the project responds to 3 eco-sites altered by the cut: the corridor, the patch, and the edge. Corridors enable movement across the wider landscape for species like the moose, who inhabit continuous old forest and are less willing to cross open spaces. The clear cuts that fragment the landscape restrict their movements to a few remaining corridors, and their populations dwindle. In clear cuts, patches of trees are left as seed generators, but the success of organisms like the lichen relies on the integrity of these patches. In older forests, the canopy protects from wind and sun, but in these tiny patches, they're exposed and less able to reproduce, harming the patch as a regenerating device. Finally, edges normally represent a structurally diverse transition between forest and open space, where many species spend part of their lives. Whereas the edge of a wetland or a meadow is complex and gradual, and is ideal for birds like the flycatcher that need both cover and nearby clearings, the long hard edges in clear cuts are too abrupt, which disrupts this condition. To support our companion species, interventions should preserve the critical habitat qualities of these ecosites. The first act of building in this imagined place addresses the fragile patches with a series of follies or pavilions to protect from blowdown and the effects of exposure, at first built a few at a time, along with new access trails. These niches, I'm calling them, would shield organisms in the patches from conditions that would strip them away. I'll show you some pictures of these in a few seconds too. Soon after the niches are built, a link across the landscape is introduced, a bridge to bypass the vast cut and connect 2 older forests. In effect, it's a surrogate landscape corridor for cut avoidant species such as moose. As the recovery program gains traction and more people are coming, a home for this Center for Forest Stewardship softens the hard tree line edge as a stitch that weaves together openness and density, an interim repair that diversifies the boundary structure. Here among the niches, the forest patch becomes a sanctuary. The structures embrace the patch with their long arms and inward focus and reflect the chaotic debris of the cut. The lichen waits patiently for the canopy to return and protect it. Until then, this is a quiet place, a place for quiet consideration of the landscape's past and future. A place within the wasteland to daydream, reminding us that we are capable of resonating with the world. The hikers linger here in the tall frames, hiding from September winds, They notice the lichen clinging to life above, spreading to the armatures around them. Tomorrow, the scientists will tell stories here to a group of kids. The niches enclose the space of the patch like a theater in dappled light. I wonder, what will she tell them? And which of these kids will return in 20 years to do the same? The loggers, surveying the effects of their business, consider the canopy. Over the horizon, a line of verticals crosses the expanse. Tall wood columns are ghosts of the forest to come. The hikers wander here from a trail and discover the walkway supported above. As they gain height, they gawk at the immensity of the cut and point to other clearings in the distance. When their grandchildren return in 50 years, this tall register of height will no longer provide a view. The vertical axis pursues the continuous dimension of forest growth, as if measuring the trees, ascending into the canopy to come. As the canopy grows higher and denser, the vertical is enveloped by the tall, restored forest. The moose are wary of the hot sun, but this long structure offers shade. Towering beside them, the strange new canopy protects their advance, stretching to a familiar forest on the other side. They follow the shadow, chewing tender stems. All along the bridge, pavilions offer new interfaces with this recovery. Some provide a vertical way of getting up to the bridge, in addition to a journey through time using controlled views. In other words, windows. What the hiker sees down low today is distant. But soon the view is filled with foliage. At another pavilion, the scientist lingers high in the canopy, taking notes, meeting students, and watching the birds. A whole new forest floor in the air. At the tree line is the Stitch buildings, the heart of the project. From a forest road and trail, the public building greets arrivals, this large one here. Along the tree line, cabins for staff and for rent are increasingly private. Weaving the abrupt edge with the cut's openness, the Stitch mediates the sun, wind, and driving rain of the open area into milder microclimates for pioneer trees to establish during recovery. Rainwater is directed to a swale, away from the regenerating edge and toward the headwaters of the Medway River. The Stitch buildings highlight a horizontal axis, sitting at the juncture between the past and future of the forest, their backs to the dense trees and their faces to the now open vista. As the cut regrows, this horizontal anticipates the collapse of difference between them. The past and the future blend together, becoming indistinguishable. Meanwhile, the horizontal register of height here asks, in 50 years, how tall will these buildings be in comparison to the trees? After exploring the site, the hungry hikers head to the kitchen and are directed to the nearby library, full of books about the forest. They're invited to listen in at tomorrow's timber industry conference. The scientist returns after her fieldwork to label her samples at the well-stocked lab. And finally, the logger arrives after learning about selective harvesting methods out on the site. He strikes up a conversation with the hikers, who convince him to join them for a dinner with a view of the clear cut. There, the scientist joins them, sharing the stories that she'll tell the children tomorrow. Up above them, the flycatcher sits as high as he can. His keen eyes catch the metallic glint of dragonflies drawn to the wet swale. His perch is not the usual dead tree, but a tall imitator. The view is great and his nest is close by. As they leave and walk further along the tree line, the scientist retires to her cabin and points the hikers to their own. Passing each of the stitch buildings, they take in the alternating rhythm of the buildings, noticing the slender pine frames that lift them up like portals, as if they hardly touch the scarred earth below. Dark wood treated with pine tar obscures the forms in the darkening light. The French poet Gaston Bachelard writes that in the imagination, there is no such thing as a young forest. The forest exists before me, before us. It reigns in the past. So in this project I've just shown you, the architecture confronts this by projecting the before time into the future, framing a relationship between inhabitants, or us, and the long, slow process of landscape time. In the project's first years, the locals and tourists who've come for day trips and overnights have left with stories. Dozens of PhD students have worked here, and hundreds of loggers have learned to restore and profit from their woodlots. As a retreat and research station, the center has been profitable despite massive reductions in harvest volumes. Soon, the huge high-value trees of old growth will be available to selectively harvest. And the site will join a local community of mills, builders, and craftspeople. The flycatchers have returned to nest and hunt, the moose have become harder to see among the growing trees, and the patches have grown and the lichen along with them. Over time, interventions like these could spread across the landscape as part of wider recovery efforts in Nova Scotia's public forests. In 100 years, the role of the center will change with the forest. But this vast hidden wasteland may yet be a vibrant landscape, stewarded into a healthy and visible Acadian forest. Thanks very much. That's the end.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful presentation, as many of our viewers on Facebook are messaging saying that it was a beautiful presentation and that they love this vision and wish we could make it real and hope we could make it real at some point. With that being said, I have a list of questions here that have been coming in throughout the presentation, but if there are any more, feel free to either type them in the Facebook comments or slip them in the chat window there, and we'll make sure that they get into our question round here. So the first one being, and I also had this one, someone kind of snagged it from me. This is really beautiful, Charlie. What inspired you to do this project?
What inspired me to do it? So I had to do a thesis to graduate. That was kind of motivator number one. But I took the opportunity for the project to dive into something that I care about, which is to make sure that all of my efforts are directed towards something positive, ecologically or climactically, or anything to do with making sure that we have a future on this planet. Of course, you can't solve that problem all at once. You have to take little bite-sized pieces and use the knowledge and specialties that you have in order to make a small difference that might add up. So in this case, I thought that architecture might make a positive, make a positive influence on this particular topic, clear-cut forestry in Nova Scotia, my home province, in two ways that I have always found really interesting in the study of architecture and in how buildings work. The first is that I think buildings do a really great job relating people to a place. Every place has a unique style of building, but every place might also be kind of magnified or reinforced by a building. Rather than having a building take away from what a landscape is, for example, in a subdivision that clears lots of space and makes it as flat as possible, it might actually enhance that place. So that's the kind of using architecture almost as an art piece that lives for 100 or more years and is constantly helping you to see and understand landscape. So that was reason number one. Reason number two was asking myself if a building might actually have a positive influence just in the way that it sheds water, if it provides habitat, and maybe instead of chasing the squirrels away, we might offer them a little house to stay in, and those kinds of topics. It's challenging to do in practice, so to offer a kind of test for that in this imaginary world of a school project was a lot of fun, and it's kind of the motivation for doing that. I hope that answers this person's question.
That's great. Thank you so much. We also want to know, is your work available somewhere as accessibly to the public?
It is available as the thesis document. This particular presentation is not public, other than this presentation that I guess is now recorded and being streamed. I could give you a link to access the thesis document on DALSpace, which is a public portion of the Dalhousie Archives and Library where they publish every single master's thesis that's ever been made. I could do that if you want. It's a little bit longer winded, but all of these pictures are in there.
I actually have that link, Charlie, so I can put it in the comment section and everywhere. So
Great. Oh, fantastic. Thanks. Thanks, Chad.
Great. Do you plan on making some of your ideas come to life at some point in the clear cuts, in the ideal world, I guess?
Hey, if there's anyone out there with a piece of land that's been clear cut, who has some extra material and some money lying around to make this happen, I would start on it tomorrow. For sure. So send me a message.
So also, how did you pick the species you focused on here? And did you find yourself doing a lot of, I guess, mixed subject research for this?
That's a really good question. I picked species that were threatened or nearing extinction from a list I found. I wish I could tell you exactly where it was. I don't know if it was natural resources, but it was a kind of a short list of the most charismatic endangered species. But on that list, I found were actually some that maybe weren't so charismatic, like the lichen, the black foam lichen, which you wouldn't think of as cute or cuddly or maybe a good face for a funding campaign. But I found really interesting because the lichen, as well as the olive-sided flycatcher and the mainland moose, all occupy very different niches. They also occupy very different points of view, which was a contributing factor. The olive-sided flycatcher is a visitor, or it's a non-resident species. It spends half of its time away. It flies and it nests high up. So from a spatial perspective, if I'm interested in how different species might interact with buildings, that's a good selection to reach a certain kind of spatial profile. The lichen doesn't move at all. It has no choice, and you have to kind of meet the lichen where it is, or the kinds of places where it might live. The moose, on the other hand, is a resident mobile mammal. So they're all quite different. And I had lots of others that I was really interested in, but those were kind of convenient to be able to tell a story. Like I said at the start of the presentation, I had a lot of simplifications in here. An olive-sided flycatcher probably wouldn't want to nest on the top of a pole. They have really specific requirements, and same with the moose and same with the lichen. But in order to tell a story about asking how architecture might actually be a positive ecological place, some of those details I had to kind of sand away and shave off.
That's great. Thank you so much. I love the broad spectrum approach to that there. We also have, you mentioned scientists. Did you have any ones that locally that inspired you for this?
My contact through the whole project in imagining a place that is a kind of learning, a place of learning and also a place of production was Christy Stratton at the Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest. I actually learned about the Medway, please correct me here on the name, it's the Medway Forest Cooperative, is that what it is? It's in your zone, up in your area.
Medway Community Forest Co-op.
Community Forest Co-op, yes, that's the one. I learned about that amazing organization halfway through. So they would have been a great set of folks to talk to early on, but Christy was my contact. I found Christy's work really interesting in the fact that she is in the field, she is in the office, she is facilitating many specialists. So in a way, she was kind of doing what I was interested in approaching. And I took the Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest as a kind of model or inspiration that might get expanded. Like if the Community Forest Co-op on the Medway River and Otter Ponds were everywhere, I think it would be a much better world.
Thank you. We have a piece of Facebook feedback. It says, so many people see clear cuts as wastelands, and in brackets it says, which is somewhat true, but I love how you turned it and made it into something useful, especially for teaching.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. They are really interesting places. Something I didn't mention at the beginning or in the presentation, I tree planted. So I spent a lot of time in clear cuts. I can't really call myself a tree planter because I only did the one season and never went back, but I was forever affected by that experience. And anybody who spends time in clear cuts, as I'm sure the commenter has, will be amazed by just how much life is there and how dynamic those environments are. And of course, it's important to take a critical view of what's going on, but it is not as if it is turned into a moonscape. There's a lot happening and a lot of life.
That's a very good way to look at that. Thank you. You chose the year 2082 in your slideshow. Was there a specific reason for that point of reference in the timeline?
No, it was 60 years after this year.
That makes sense.
Yeah, 60 years was a number I kept finding for the kind of minimum age at which our resident softwood species would be mature. Of course, they will live for hundreds of years and they're not at their largest at that point, but that's kind of like the beginning of the mature stage. Certain hardwood trees as well start to fall into that range around 75, maybe later. I think you'll get different answers when you ask different folks, but that's kind of the basis for that year. So that's like the beginning of the mature forest. Of course, the longer the better, but that's going to be like 5 human lifetimes. Everybody's forgotten about this project. Hopefully it's had a positive influence. Who knows?
Thank you. As well as, which I guess this is a very fitting question. It's one of the last ones I have on my screen here. What comes now for you after university? The big question you get asked in university.
That is the big question. I work for a firm in Dartmouth in Nova Scotia, and unfortunately I'm not doing this kind of work every day, but I'm really grateful to be learning in all kinds of other projects. So just learning how to produce the documents that you need to make a building, I need those skills in order to do anything that's going to be positive for the planet in the future. So I might have to make a couple of apartment buildings in the meantime.
Definitely fair enough.
I'm really lucky that I work for a firm that does a lot of very visionary, like cool, positive projects. I'm really, really lucky to be able to do that. It forms, less than a quarter of the hours in a week, hours in a year, but forms like 99% of the motivation for doing the job. It is so incredible when a client or a community that you're working for says, this is going to make our world better. This is going to make my world better. To be able to continue to do that is an enormous privilege and something I'm really looking forward to in the rest of my career.
Great, thank you. That is a great outlook on this, I have to say, definitely. So I see here in our Zoom window, and I'm assuming on Facebook as well, we have the link to Charles's full thesis on Dell Space. Chad's giving me the thumbs up, so that means yes, it is also in the Facebook comments. Yeah, I think that wraps up our question period, but I just want to say thank you again for the very beautiful presentation, not only in imagery, but also the storytelling of this was phenomenal. It was very nice to sit and listen to. Absolutely. So thank you again. And thank you as well to everyone who joined us tonight. Next week, next Thursday, August 25th, will be our next summer seminar, and we'll be joined by MTRI's own ecologist, Chad Simmons, who's up in the corner of the screen as well, for his seminar on Getting Swamped, the Unappreciated World of Wetlands. I would like to thank the Region of Queens for supporting us and our seminar series. As always, you can stay up to date with our seminars by following us on Facebook. And if you'd like to watch tonight's seminar again, you can check out our Facebook Live video stream or visit our YouTube channel. We hope everyone stays well and we all get to see you again very, very soon. So thank you again.